Hello, students. Welcome back to your computer science class. I am Mrs. Jenny Shah, and today we will continue with the second part of the chapter Society, Law, and Ethics. Today we are going to talk about the open source philosophy and software licenses. Open source software is used to refer to those softwares whose licenses do not impose a lot of conditions. These softwares, they give users the freedom to run the software for any purpose they want, to study, to modify it, to redistribute it, etc., without paying for without any payment at all. But there are many categories of software that can be referred to as open source software. Let's talk about some terms. There are two terms: free software and open source software. But before we get into that, let's understand what is software licensing. A license is basically an agreement that will govern the use of that software. And license agreements, they typically allow that software to run only on a limited number of computers, and they do not allow a lot of copies to be made unless and until for backup purposes. There are 5 types of software licenses. Public domain license. In this license, anyone is free to use and modify the software the way they want. LGPL. You can link to the open source libraries within your own software, and the resulting code can be licensed under any other type of license. Permissive. Permissive means few restrictions or requirements for the distribution, or few modifications to the software are allowed. Copyleft. Copyleft is basically restrictive, but it is known as a reciprocal licenses. And proprietary. Proprietary, this is the most restrictive. Basically, that software is ineligible for copying, modifying, or distributing. Now, there were two terms: free software and open source software. What is free software? Free software is freely accessible, and it can be freely used, changed, improved, copied, distributed, etc. No payments are needed to be made for it. So basically, it is a software that respects the user's rights, letting the user do whatever they want to do. The software is free, just like freedom, but not as in free beer. There are 4 essential freedoms. The freedom to run the program as you wish for any purpose. The freedom to study how the program works and change it so it does your computing as you wish. The freedom to redistribute copies so you can help your neighbors, and the freedom to distribute copies of your modified versions to others. Freedom software is a matter of the user's freedom to run, copy, distribute, study, and change and improve the software. A program is a free software if the user has all these freedoms. These are some examples of free software: Linux, WordPress, VLC, Mozilla, etc. What is open source? Open source software is a software that users have the ability to run, distribute, study, and modify for any purpose. It can be freely used, but it does not have to be free of charge. Here, the company constructing the business models around open source software can receive payments concerning support and further development. Basically, in open source software, the source code of that software is freely available to the customer. It is a collaborative software development method which harnesses the power of peer review and transparency of process to develop the code that is freely accessible. Open source draws on an ecosystem of thousands of developers and customers all over the world to drive innovation. These are some examples of open source software. You must have noticed that some of these are also an example of free software. Open source doesn't just mean to access the source code. The distribution terms of open source software must comply with certain criteria. We know that there are four freedoms given. Number one is freedom to run the program for any purpose. Next is to study how the program works and change it according to our wish. Third was to redistribute it so that we can help our neighbors. And the last one was to redistribute the modified version that we created. But there are certain criteria for open source. Source code. The program must include the source code and it must allow the redistribution of source code as well as in the compiled form. Derived work. The license must allow modification and derived works, and it must allow them to redistribute under some terms under the same terms as the license of the original software. Free, free redistribution. The rights attached to the program must apply to all to whom the program is redistributed. Integrity of the author's code. The integrity of author's source code must also be maintained. Any addition or modification should carry a different name or it should carry a version number so that the original code is maintained. License must not restrict other software. The license must not place restrictions on other softwares that is distributed along with the licenses. Software. For example, the license must not insist that all other programs distributed on the same medium must be open source software. No discrimination against person or group. The license must not discriminate against any person or group of people. No discrimination against fields of endeavor. Again, there should be no distribution. The license must not restrict anyone from making use of the program in a specific field of endeavor. For example, it may not restrict the program from being used in businesses or from being used for genetic research. So these are all other criteria for an open source software. Now, we'll talk about a few terms. A software which is free as well as open belongs to another category called FOSS. You must have noticed there were some softwares that were examples of free software and they were examples of open source software. These will fall under the category of FOSS, that is free and open source software. The terms free and open source represent a differing emphasis on the importance of freedom or technical progress. Now, you have understood the difference between free and open source. Now we will understand some other terms which pertain to open source software. The first is FLOSS. There is another one inside this, which is OSS. OSS means open source software. Okay, in which the source code is available to the users and it can be modified and redistributed. Now, FLOSS refers to free, libre, and open source software, or free, libre, and open source software. Okay, it is used to refer to a software which is both free and open source. Over here, the word libre, which is a Spanish word, or you can use livre, which is a Portugal word. Both of it means freedom. Okay. Next one is GNU. GNU, the full form of GNU is GNU is not Unix. NU is not Unix. It stands for GNU is not Unix. It is the name for the complete Unix compatible software system, okay, which was written by Richard Stallman so that he can give it away free to everyone who can use it. It was a project that emphasized on freedom. It was initiated by Richard M. Stallman with the objective to create an operating system. GNU project later on expanded over time, and now it is not only limited to operating system, but it offers a wide range of softwares, including applications apart from the operating system. Next is FSF, Free Software Foundation. This is a non-profit organization which is created for supporting free software movement. Again, Richard Stallman has founded FSF in 1985 to support the GNU project and the GNU license. It also works on legal and structural issues of the free software community. Open Source Initiative, OSI. Open Source Initiative is an organization dedicated to cause of promoting open source software. Bruce Perens and Eric Raymond, they were the founders of OSI, which was founded in February 1998. OSI specifies the criteria for open source software and properly defines the terms and specifications of open source software. Freeware. This term is generally used for software which is available free of cost, and it allows copying and further distribution. But it does not allow modification, and the source code is not available. You should not mistake freeware with open source software or free software. Freeware is distributed in the binary form. Binary form is ready to run form without any licensing fee. Sometimes the rights to use this software is limited to some types of users. Example, private and non-commercial purposes only you can use these softwares. One example is Microsoft Internet Explorer, which is made available as a freeware. W3C, World Wide Web Consortium. This is an acronym, and it is responsible for producing the software standards for the World Wide Web. It was created in October 1994, and it led the World Wide Web to its full potential by developing common protocols that promote its evolution and ensure its interoperability. Next is proprietary software. Proprietary software means that the company that developed the software, they own the software and no person can duplicate it or redistribute it without that company's permission. For these softwares, the users have to pay if they want to use it. Source code is not available, and further distribution, modification is forbidden, or it requires special permission by the supplier. Next is shareware. Shareware refers to commercial software that is copyrighted. Basically, it is made available with the right to redistribute copies, but it is stipulated that if one wants to use the software for a long after a certain period of time, then the license fee has to be paid. So basically, it is provided initially free of charge, but just for trying, and then later they have to pay if they want to continue to use it. It is not the same as free and open source software because number one, source code is not available, and number two, modification to the software is not allowed. The objective of shareware is to make the software available to try out, as some users may not want it. This increases the prospective users who will pay for the software if the software meets their needs. It is distributed in the binary form, and it normally includes a built-in timed mechanism that limits the functionality after a trial period of 1 to 3 months. Copylefted software. Now, copylefted software is free software whose distribution ensure that all copies of all versions carry more or less the same distribution terms. It means, for example, that the copyleft licenses generally disallow others to add additional requirement and require making source code available. This will save the program and its modified version from some common ways of making program proprietary. Basically, it takes away the freedom to turn the software into a proprietary software. GNU GPL requires the users to pass on their rights to copy the software, change it, access the source code unimpaired to the other users. Licenses and domains of the open source technology. Now, open source licenses make it very easy for others to contribute to a project without having to seek special permission. It will protect you as the original creator, making sure that you get credit for your contribution, but it will also help prevent others from claiming your work as their own. So the first license is Creative Commons license. Now, before we go there, let's just sum up what we learned about open source software, freeware, public domain software, and free software. I want you all to take a minute to understand this chart with examples and make notes of it in your notebooks. I expect you to pause the screen to make your notes and understand it on your own. Okay, the next one, the difference between copyright, copyleft, permissive, and Creative Commons, the one that we are learning right now. Okay, I'm going to continue. Creative Commons licenses. Now, these CC licenses, they are issued by the Creative Commons organization, which allows the creator of the work to select how they want others to use the work. Now, You can see these are the kinds of licenses that they give us, these. And depending on which logo is there, this is the meaning of it. Okay. It allows people to select the kind of license they want, whether they want people to seek the creator's permission or they want that the user can use it any way they want. Okay. There are standard rights and obligations. There are 6 core licenses, each of which allows members of the public to use material in different ways, but they all include some rights and obligations. The CC licenses, they give permission to copy, modify, distribute the original work by attributing the creator of the work. So if you see an is equal to sign, it means others can only copy, distribute, display, or perform. Okay. When you see this license, it says others can copy, distribute, display, perform, and remix your work if they credit your name. Over here, share alike means you can distribute your work only under a license identical to the one that you have chosen for your work. And if you see the DOL means no others can copy, distribute, display, perform, but only for non-commercial purposes. Okay. Next is the GNU GPL license. GNU GPL is probably one of the most commonly used licenses. It is a free copyleft license for software. It is intended to guarantee your freedom to share and change all versions of a program to make sure it remains free software for all the users. Okay. Next is the Apache license. Okay. In GNU, you also have the freedom to distribute copies. You receive source code and you can change it if you want, and you can even distribute the new program that you create. But you have some responsibilities. That is, you must respect the freedom of other people also. Now, Apache license. It is a permissive license whose main conditions require preservation of copyright and license notices. The contributors, they provide an express grant of patent rights. Licensed works, modifications, and larger work may be distributed under different terms without source code. Okay, so it grants a number of rights to the users, which can be applied to both copyrights as well as patents. That brings us to the question, the difference between public domain software and proprietary software. Open source software refers to the software that is developed and tested through open collaboration. Anyone with academic knowledge can access, inspect, modify, and redistribute the source code. The project is managed by an open source community of developers and programmers. They are not aimed at unskilled users outside of the programming community. It provides better flexibility, which means more freedom, which encourages innovation. Some examples are Android, Firefox, LibreOffice, Ubuntu, FreeBSD, Drupal, and GNOME. Proprietary software is the software that is solely owned by the individual or organization that developed it. Only the owner or the publisher, only the owner or the publisher who holds the legal property rights of the source code can access it. The project is managed by a closed group of individuals or teams that developed it. They are focused on a limited market of both skilled and unskilled users. There is a very limited scope of innovation with all the restrictions. Some examples are Windows, Macintosh, iTunes, Google Earth, Adobe Flash, etc. So with this, children, I'm ending this class today. Next class, we will finish this chapter. Okay, finish reading this much part in your textbooks, and I want you all to make notes like I have told you all. That would be your homework for today. With this, I end today's class. Stay home, stay safe, take care, keep learning. Thank you.